Chapter 2. Solomon watched Teresa leave his private study, her determined footsteps echoing in the stone hallway. As the door closed behind her, he sank back into his chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion from the long, harrowing night spent at his brother Otto's side. The wine bottle on his desk beckoned him, and he poured himself a generous glass, savoring the rich, velvety liquid as it burned a comforting path down his throat. He glanced at the half-finished letter to Sir Benjamin and sighed, picking up his quill to complete his notes. The parchment absorbed the ink as he wrote, the rhythmic scratching of the quill a small solace in the silence of the study. With the final flourish, he set the quill down and leaned back, the letters before him a tangible reminder of the men to whom he would soon send them. Derek Stonebow, a stoic and distant man, Derek ruled over the lush lands of Capria, a nation of forests and rivers, green hills and towering mountains. Solomon had never visited Capria, but its reputation as a peaceful, bountiful place was well known. Derek, however, was an enigma, his emotions guarded and his intentions often inscrutable. The two had never been close, their interactions limited to formal occasions and council meetings. Thomas Storm, known as the Lord of the Tides, Thomas's domain stretched across the rugged coastline and into the vast, unpredictable sea. A hard man with a sharp mind, Thomas was as unforgiving as the waters he commanded. The history between their families was complicated, a tapestry woven with threads of old alliances and lingering resentments. Solomon knew that gaining Thomas's support would be a challenge, his loyalty to the throne tempered by memories of his ancestors' lost sovereignty. Long ago, these men had been kings in their own right, each ruling over their lands with pride and autonomy. But Aden, the great unifier, had brought them together under the gold and red dragon banner, demoting their ancestors to lords. The wounds from that time ran deep, and Solomon could not be sure if these men still harbored hidden grudges against his family for stripping them of their power. In contrast, Lord Catpad was a light-hearted, jovial man who wore rich yellow silks and indulged in the finest wines and feasts. His castle, nestled in the open grassy meadows, was a place of revelry and mirth. Solomon allowed himself a small smile at the thought of his old friend. The plump, cheerful lord had always been a loyal ally, and Solomon knew he could count on Catpad's support in the uncertain days ahead. Solomon took another sip of his wine, the smile fading as he thought of Teresa's boldness. Her claim to the throne was unexpected, her fierce determination a stark reminder of how much she had grown. When had she become such a player in this struggle for power? The question lingered in his mind, echoing the prophecy that had haunted him for years. 7 kings will rise, 7 kings will fall, and then the darkness shall return. He murmured the ancient words as if they were a prayer, the weight of the prophecy pressing down on him. Otto had been the 7th king since Aden had forged the realm, and now the throne was at a crossroads. Solomon's thoughts grew darker. There must be an 8th king, he reflected, no matter how unprepared Jason might be. The fate of the world could depend on it. He drained the last of his wine, feeling foolish for putting so much stock in old wives' tales and prophecies from centuries past. But the sense of impending doom was hard to shake. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a relentless heat over the castle, Solomon's exhaustion overtook him. His head drooped and he fell asleep at his desk, his dreams drifting back to the night Teresa was born, almost 30 years earlier. The night Teresa was born had been one of both joy and turmoil. Solomon remembered it vividly, the events seared into his memory by the intensity of the emotions they had stirred. The castle had been bustling with activity, servants rushing to and fro, preparing for the arrival of the new heir. Otto had been away on a campaign, leading his troops against a marauding band of raiders threatening the kingdom's borders. Solomon had stood vigil in the grand hall, his heart heavy with worry for his brother and anticipation for the birth of his niece. The castle had seemed almost alive with the energy of the moment, the air thick with the mingled scents of incense and candle wax. He had paced the stone floor, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. The midwives' voices had echoed down the corridors, a blend of calm instructions and hurried reassurances. Solomon had felt helpless, his role as an observer starkly contrasted with the life-or-death struggle taking place in the birthing chamber. He had prayed silently to the goddess, beseeching her to watch over his brother's wife and the child she carried. Finally, the cry of a newborn had pierced the air, a sound that had filled Solomon with a surge of relief and joy. He had rushed to the chamber, eager to see the new princess. The room had been warm and dimly lit, the midwives bustling about with smiles on their faces. And there, in the arms of her exhausted but radiant mother, had been Teresa. She had been a small, delicate thing, her skin pale, and her hair already a silvery white. Solomon had been struck by her beauty, a stark reminder of the legacy she carried. He had reached out to touch her tiny hand, marveling at the strength of her grip. "She is perfect," he had said, his voice thick with emotion. Her mother had smiled weakly, her eyes shining with pride and love. Otto had returned to the castle a few days later, weary but triumphant. The news of his daughter's birth had brought a rare smile to his face, and he had lifted her high in the air, proclaiming her the future of their house. "She is my blood and my heir," he proclaimed boldly. The celebrations that had followed had been grand, a testament to the joy and hope that Teresa's birth had brought to the realm. But that joy had been tempered by the ever-present shadow of duty and responsibility. Solomon had watched as Otto took on the mantle of fatherhood with the same determination and resolve he had shown on the battlefield. He had seen the weight of the crown settle on his brother's shoulders, the burden of leadership a constant presence, yet being a king seemed a much easier task than being a father. As Teresa grew, she had shown herself to be a child of great intelligence and spirit. Solomon had taken a keen interest in her education, teaching her the ways of the court and the intricacies of politics. He had seen in her the potential for greatness, a spark that promised to blaze brightly in the years to come. Otto had grown distant, his mind deeply troubled. One night Solomon climbed to the highest tower in the castle, finding his brother standing there, gazing out across the desert and the city that spilled down the mountainside. The stars began to appear overhead, and the cool of the night slowly crept back into the world, easing the day's heat. Solomon stood silently beside Otto, allowing the night to envelop them in its stillness. After a long pause, Otto finally broke the silence. "There has been news from our spies in the Tyrant Empire," he said, his voice heavy with concern. Solomon felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. "What news?" he asked, bracing himself for the worst. "King Duna is marching against Alzaria. The elders there have requested my aid in defending themselves." Solomon was silent, unsure of how to respond. The weight of Otto's words settled heavily between them, an unspoken understanding of the gravity of the situation. "It's my job to go," Otto continued, as if he were trying to convince himself. "I am king. That is my duty. Yet—" "Teresa," Solomon offered, finishing his elder brother's thoughts. "What sort of man abandons his own wife and child?" The conflict in Otto's eyes was unmistakable. He had always strived to be different from their father, King Darren, a man who ruled the realm with an iron fist and kept the people in line through sheer force of will. Otto had sworn never to become like him. But now, faced with the prospect of leaving his family behind to defend a distant land, he felt the weight of his duty pressing down on him. "Maybe if I had been more like father, Duna would not have grown so bold," Otto reflected bitterly. "You can't know that," Solomon pointed out gently, though Otto did not seem to hear him. He was lost in his own thoughts, grappling with the decision before him. Since they had been old enough to walk, Otto and Solomon had been raised differently. Otto, the heir, had been given a sword and taught to fight and rule. Their father had made sure there was no room for mercy or weakness in Otto's upbringing. A king had to be as hard as the land he ruled, especially in the barren desert kingdom. Solomon, on the other hand, had been dealt a kinder fate. With their father focused on Otto, their mother had placed a book in Solomon's hands instead of a sword. He had learned to read, write, and study the histories of the past. He was given a blade, and I a book, Solomon reflected, and the difference between them now could not be more stark. "I will take what men we have and instruct my lords to meet me in Alzaria with their armies," Otto said suddenly, rejoining the conversation with a grim determination. "I will do what I can for Teresa," Solomon promised. Otto nodded, reaching into his pocket and producing a golden dragon pin. He pressed the bit of metal into Solomon's open palm. "I name you the Chancellor. In my absence, you shall rule over our realm." Solomon paused in shock at the great honor. He had never sought power. He was unmarried and had no children. He had been content to spend his days as a dutiful son and brother. But now, looking down at the golden pin in his hand, he felt the weight of new responsibilities settling on his shoulders. "I will do what I can to serve you well, my king," he said solemnly. Otto gave him a sad smile and turned to gaze out over the city once more. "Thank you, brother." The next day, Queen Ophelia stood with Teresa in hand, along with Solomon in the high tower, as Otto and his army prepared to depart. The young queen was strikingly beautiful, a tall, slender figure with long brunette hair that fell down her back and shoulders. She wore a soft green dress that clung to her curves, accentuating her large breasts. She coughed delicately, dabbing at her forehead with a cloth. "I have never taken well to the heat of this land," she murmured. "It's always too hot and dry." Solomon pulled his eyes away from her alluring figure, focusing instead on the task at hand. She was like a rare desert flower, blooming in a barren world. Together, the three of them looked down at the long rows of soldiers in red armor, marching down the mountainside and into the desert. The golden dragon on their banners flapped in the hot, dry wind, kicking up a storm of dust. At the head of the column rode Otto, flanked by his generals. Solomon clutched the dragon pin on his red tunic tightly, wondering how many of their men would never return home. The sight of the departing army filled him with a sense of foreboding. He knew that the coming conflict would be long and difficult, and the outcome uncertain. As Otto and his soldiers disappeared into the distance, Solomon felt the weight of his new responsibilities settle more heavily on his shoulders. He turned to Queen Ophelia and Teresa, offering them what reassurance he could. "I will do everything in my power to protect the realm in Otto's absence," he promised. Ophelia nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of worry and determination. "We will endure," she said softly, "for Otto and for our people." Solomon's thoughts drifted back to the present as he stirred in his sleep, the echoes of the past mingling with the uncertainties of the future. The prophecy loomed large in his mind, a shadow that refused to be banished. 7 kings had risen and fallen, and now the realm stood on the brink of a new era. Would Jason be the 8th king, the one to lead them into a new age? Or would Teresa's fierce ambition and determination change the course of history? The questions gnawed at Solomon's mind, even as he succumbed to the pull of sleep. He dreamed of a great battle, of dragons and fire, of a throne made of bones and a crown of thorns. He saw Jason, young and uncertain, struggling to hold the scepter of power. He saw Teresa, her eyes blazing with resolve, standing at the helm of a vast army. The vision shifted and changed, the future uncertain and full of possibilities. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its golden light over the castle, Solomon slept on, his dreams a tangled web of prophecy, memory, and hope. The fate of the realm hung in the balance, and the choices made in the days to come would shape the destiny of all who lived within its borders.